And now to what's being called the biggest breach since Edward Snowden. American intelligence has been compromised yet again. Hundreds of documents have been leaked. These are papers marked as top secret. They're about the war in Ukraine, about America's assessment of the conflict. They have maps, charts, and photographs, and most importantly, they have American intelligence from both sides, Ukraine and Russia. This is classified information. It's the kind of stuff that is not shared with the public and not spoken about in press conferences. These are American national security secrets, and now they've been leaked. They're out on social media platforms. The biggest revelation is this: a US assessment about the war in Ukraine. Washington is not confident about Ukraine's air defenses. It fears that Kiev could soon run out of missiles, and without immediate assistance, it could suffer serious setbacks. Now, you could say none of this is a secret, really. It's evident to anyone who's following the war. And you'd be right. But here's why this is significant. Publicly, the Americans say Ukraine is winning the war. Privately, they feel Ukraine is vulnerable. And this private assessment is now public. It's embarrassing for the US establishment. And it is damaging for Ukraine. Remember, in war, information is also a weapon. That is why it is so carefully guarded and managed. So this leak is definitely a loss. And we're not talking about one or two documents here. We're talking about almost 100 top secret documents. Almost 100 documents have been leaked. They appeared on internet platforms like Twitter, 4chan, and Telegram. It's not clear who leaked them, but the papers look photographed, as if someone took them out of a folder and clicked photos and then published them online. American officials are probing the source of the leak, and the papers reveal a lot. We'll cover the highlights tonight, starting with Ukraine's ability to defend itself. The leaked papers say that Ukraine is running out of supplies, specifically missiles for air defense. And this assessment dates back to February this year. So it's more than 2 months old, more than a month old, rather. It said that Ukraine is rapidly using up its stockpile, and by the 2nd of May, it could exhaust its air defenses. Now, let me repeat, this was the assessment in the month of February. We cannot say if it holds today or if Ukraine's stockpile is depleting at the same pace or faster or slower. But we do know that Kiev still depends on the West, and that Zelensky has repeatedly asked allies to speed up deliveries. So it is possible that Kiev would need more missiles, and that without them, it would be vulnerable. Russia will get an opening then to launch more aerial attacks. A Ukrainian colonel was asked about these leaks. He refused to comment on the specifics, but he did say that allies should speed up assistance. In fact, I have that statement with me. This is what he says: if we lose the battle for the skies, the consequences for Ukraine will be very serious. This is not the time to procrastinate. Clearly, the risk is real, and this is only one part of the leaked documents. What else do they say? They confirm what the world has long known, that America likes to spy both on allies and adversaries. These papers have revelations from Canada. This is about a Canadian gas pipeline. It was compromised by a Russian hacking group in February, and the US had an assessment about it. It said the hackers were being guided by Russia's FSB. FSB is the Russian Federal Security Service. It is the successor to the infamous spy agency KGB, of which President Putin was once a member. Meanwhile, the leaked papers also talk about Israel, about the recent protests against Prime Minister Netanyahu's judicial reform. You may remember those, the large-scale protests. They were arguably the biggest ever in Israel. Now, the Pentagon had a view on these protests. It says this was the work of Mossad. Mossad is Israel's spy agency. The Pentagon believes that Mossad backs the protest against Prime Minister Netanyahu, and that it encouraged its staff and Israeli citizens to participate in these protests. This is quite a dramatic claim. If proven, it could have serious consequences in Israel. For now, Israel has disputed it. The American papers also mention the possibility of Israel supplying weapons to Ukraine. It hasn't happened yet, Israel supplying weapons to Ukraine, but American officials have gamed out that scenario. South Korea, too, features in the leaks. Apparently, Seoul is torn between backing Ukraine and upholding its own policy. What policy? South Korea has a policy of not providing lethal weapons to a country at war. Now, the US believes they're debating this policy. And of course, Russia is a prominent feature in the American leaks. One of the documents says Russia is prepared to give a bonus to its troops. A bonus for what? For damaging or destroying a NATO tank in the battlefield. There's also an assessment on the Wagner Group. It says Wagner is working to thwart American interests in Africa. Wagner is a group of mercenaries. Again, none of this is a top secret, really. But the papers give you an insight into how America reads the current developments. Now, the question is, who leaked these documents? And why did they do it now? Did the Russians do it to embarrass the US? Did the Americans do it themselves to make a point? Was it Ukraine to force America's hand? Or a third party seeking to influence Washington's ties and moves? Honestly, we don't know. But the revelations could make allies think twice about sharing information with the US. In West Asia, the sands continue to shift, and the forgotten war is back in focus. We're talking about Yemen, the poorest country in West Asia, with a population of more than 30 million. It has been at war for over 9 years. It's a proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and it has ravaged the country. A record number of civilians have been killed, tens of thousands have been injured, and more people than ever are going hungry. 80% of Yemenis now depend on humanitarian aid. Yemen is a small West Asian nation and a site of grievous suffering. This desert nation on the edge of the Arabian Peninsula shares its borders with Saudi Arabia and Oman. And its neighbors, along with other countries, have literally backed it into a corner. We are talking about Yemen's forgotten war. It has been the country's undoing. At least 14% of its population have been displaced. Thousands killed, 70% of them are children. And most Yemenis are going hungry.
We were playing when a shell was fired from there. It hit us. I found myself in the hospital the next day. I tried to reach for my leg, but my father told me I was injured and I lost it.
There are a few organizations that hand out a ration of wheat every 3 months. It's handed out to some families only. Some organizations do not include this area in their aid handouts at all. The residential part of the city is in the line of fire and no aid has entered for a while.
With the lack of support provided to Yemen, the crisis will grow bigger and people's needs will multiply.
Yemen has been called the world's worst humanitarian crisis. But now there may be a ray of hope. A hope for ceasefire and a potentially permanent one. But first, let's quickly understand the conflict. Yemen's civil war began in 2014. It was started by Houthi insurgents. These are Shiite rebels with links to Iran and a history of rising up against Yemen's Sunni government. They took control of Yemen's capital, Sana'a. They toppled Yemen's Saudi-backed government in 2014. This invited intervention from foreign powers like Saudi Arabia. They economically isolated Yemen and launched violence against it. Even so, now Houthis control northern Yemen, and they've been fighting a Saudi-led military alliance since 2015. Yemen continues to pay the price of this proxy war. But now Saudi Arabia wants to talk peace. In fact, talks are on between Riyadh and Sana'a, and the neighboring kingdom of Oman is mediating. Saudi and Omani delegations landed in Sana'a late on Saturday.
We are continuing and making these efforts in the context of achieving just peace. First, we affirm our firm position adhering to our just cause in more than a speech and stance. Our just demands include stopping the aggression completely.
Their commitments have not been made public yet, but reports say they're looking at lifting a Saudi-led blockade on Yemeni ports. They want to fully reopen the Sana'a airport. And remember, Yemen has been working towards lasting peace for some time now. But this is the closest it has gotten to any real progress since the war began. International efforts are also making progress, like the United Nations peace efforts. They've been going on parallelly. They resulted in a temporary ceasefire last year. It was a period of truce. It enabled confidence-building measures, and restrictions on imports were eased. Prisoner exchange programs were held. But the real momentum came when Saudi Arabia and Iran agreed to re-establish ties last month.
At the end of the talks, we reached a conclusion to start a new chapter after 7 years of breaking off relations between the Islamic Republic of Iran and Saudi Arabia. While considering the matters of the two countries and the security and future of the region, to prevent meddling from extra-regional and Western states and consistent meddling of the Zionist regime in the region.
Saudi and Iran are behind this proxy war in Yemen. So if they take a step towards peace, the impact will be felt in Yemen too.
I would expect to see, or I would certainly track any developments in Yemen for the next weeks and months to see if this agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran has any impact on the ground in Yemen, where I think all parties, at least the Saudis and the Iranians, both probably want to move on.
For a number of years, they have very much been in direct conflict as well as indirect conflict in other parts of the Middle East. And anything that can be done to reduce the kinds of violence that we see in Yemen, in Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, between Iran and Saudi Arabia directly is of benefit not just to the people in the region, but also to the world.
Experts say that battle fatigue is clear among all parties. It seems like a war with no end and no fruits either. Can the peace talks, on top of everything else, help Yemen? There is no right answer yet. They can definitely make a dent, but it won't be easy. The political landscape in Yemen is complex. Negotiations could be drawn out. It could be extremely difficult to settle the differences. And Houthis remain the major force here. But they're talking to Saudis in the absence of other parties, including the Al-Qaeda. So while the détente between Saudis and Iran has helped, peace for Yemen will be a different ballgame. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We're starting with Ukraine. Russia forces attacked a residential building in the city of Zaporizhia. 2 people have been killed. In Indonesia, a giant sperm whale died after washing up on a beach. This is the 3rd such incident in Bali in a week. Meanwhile, a town in Finland held a reindeer racing championship. In the US, divers and snorkelers participated in a fun Easter egg hunt. And finally, we're taking you back in history, what happened on the 10th of April. Titanic started its journey from England. The year was 1912. Titanic was the world's largest and most luxurious passenger ship of the time. It was traveling to New York. Its builders said the ship was unsinkable. The so-called technological marvel could not survive an iceberg. We all know how it ended. It sank, and so did the aspirations of voyagers and the overconfidence of the builders. More than 1,500 people, in fact, died. We're leaving you with this. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Keltaisella värillä tullaan nyt vahva. Nyt se on mennyt jo aikoja sitten. 10 aluksi pystyi tuoda keulapaikkaa puolustamaan. Sen sijaan punaisena tulee ykkösenä kulkuri. Nyt se on mennyt jo aikoja sitten. 10 sekuntia. Se on Kanadainen ykkönen. Lähelle tulee, todella lähelle, erittäin lähelle. Ei aivan riitaa. Loiskasta tuo loppusuora.